So I think the best thing for the industry is to embrace the computer-controlled, lathes, and embrace, modern techniques for creating guitars,
Right.
and embrace, competition from foreign sources, because it makes our guys step up their game.
Alright guys, in today's video I've got another really cool interview that I did over at the Thomann Gearhead University event in Germany. Now this interview is with the YouTuber Steve from Boston. A lot of you I'm sure are already familiar with his channel. He used to be known as Pixelix, and he's just a really great guitarist and does really cool, really fun videos here on YouTube. Now in this interview we talk about how guitar manufacturing has evolved over the years and whether or not having a handmade guitar is still a good thing. Steve made some really good points and it turned out to be a really interesting conversation. Alright guys, let's check out the interview. Steve from Boston, here we go. Hey guys, here we are at Thomann Gearhead University 2019. I'm sitting down with one of my favorite YouTubers, Steve from Boston. Can I call you the artist formerly known as Pixelix?
You can, yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can call me Pixelix, but no one else.
Okay, thank you. It's a privilege.
That's a running joke for about 2 years now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, we've been having a great time here at the Thomann event.
Oh, yes.
Really cool of them, to bring us out and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
One of the cool things is we get to look at prototypes sometimes and a lot of the new guitars coming out. And something that I've noticed now, but past few years, I feel like the stigma of Chinese or overseas manufacturing has really changed. Like the stigma is starting to go away because I'm seeing, new companies that are coming out where these are like Chinese companies. It's like, yep, they're made in China, but this is like high-end Chinese manufacturing.
Absolutely.
Or, more established older companies that are doing more and more manufacturing overseas, right? And people don't shy away from it like they used to, right?
Right.
So what I want to ask you is how do you think that change affects the industry overall? And if you look at it the other way, if we have more and more of that kind of manufacturing, is the more traditional manufacturing, the handmade, some shop in Nashville or something like that, is that still valuable? Does that have as much value as it used to?
Right.
What do you think, man?
Well, I think that the stigma that imports used to have was well-deserved because back in the 70s, the first import company used to be U.S., then it was U.S. and Japan, then it was U.S., Japan, and Korea, then it was U.S., Japan, Korea, and Indonesia, then it was U.S., Japan, Korea, Indonesia, and China. And so we keep expanding. Now we've added Vietnam, right? We've added all these extra layers of places where you can go to get stuff created. Now, I started playing guitar in 1972, and the guitars back then were really bad. So if you had like a Japanese imported like Harmony, it had a neck like a baseball bat. It might have been made from who knows what wood, some crazy grain wood that if you looked at it, you'd be like, what even is that? Sometimes the frets weren't even on tangs, they were just glued on the front. They had flat bottoms and they would just be glued flat, which the intonation was horrible. And the tops of them, they would just flatten them so they wouldn't have, they would sort of just plane the top so that they wouldn't have any high frets, so they'd all be even, but they'd never crown the frets. Right. They wouldn't do anything like that. When you got to America, they understood all that stuff, and they were able to make much. It was like night and day, and you'd say, like, well, you always have to buy American. Then Ibanez came along.
Right.
And Ibanez was a real game changer for the industry because they said, okay, we're going to be an import company, but we're going to they were one of the first companies to ever use a CNC machine.
Really?
And back in the early 80s, they were one of the first ones. And they sort of really took the stigma away for a guitar outside of the U.S. And then for a while, it was like U.S. and Japan, but any other country, not so much, right?
Okay.
So once you got to Korea, then it really took a dive because the Korean guys just didn't know what they were doing quite as much as the other two. They had a lot more years of practice, and they didn't have the machinery like the other countries had. Cut to maybe 5 or 6 years after that, the Koreans get their act together. Their guitars are getting really good, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And now we're moving on to, say, Indonesia. And of course, the first ones out are hot garbage. They're just terrible, right?
Sure.
But they very quickly realize, and they're always, a lot of those guitars aren't built around what they imagine for a guitar. They start with one thing, the price point, and they work backwards from there. And
Okay.
every decision made about that guitar is to meet a certain price point,
Right.
and that's it, right?
Yeah.
They're looking to differentiate themselves by price.
Yeah.
That just keeps going and going and going and going until now we get to today,
Yeah.
where you have CNC machines that are accurate within, like, say, 1/10 of the hair of one hair on
Yeah.
your head,
Yeah.
right? Which no manufacturer. Guitars used to say, well, this guitar's kind of nice, but this one isn't quite as nice. That's because two different guys made that guitar.
Sure.
And one guy had
Yeah.
a certain feel for how he liked his neck, and another guy had a certain feel about how he liked his neck. And they were both good,
Yeah.
but it was a matter of preference. You didn't have the consistency like you had with a CNC machine. Now, every guitar felt like every other guitar in that line. So if you spec'd out a guitar, you would be consistent from model to model to model.
Right.
It also cuts down on waste because
Yeah.
you don't have so many that you're like, oh, this neck isn't right. We've taken too much off. We can't put wood back on.
Yeah.
And so this
Gotta
is going
scrap
to
it.
it's going to scrap it, and that drives costs up. And these people are so cost conscious when they're putting together these instruments. Just little by little. Fast forward to today, my mind is blown when I check out some of these guitars. It's like, how does Harley Benton put a guitar
yeah.
together for $199?
Yeah.
$299.
Yeah.
That is just unbelievable. Those
Yeah.
acoustics for like $299 that look
Yeah.
like a $4,000 Taylor,
Yeah.
or some high end. And every little thing, it's like, oh, you like the little corner cut like this? Oh yeah, we can do that because they have a machine that can do it accurately, predictably.
Wood binding and all
Wood
stuff.
binding,
Yeah, it's
all
amazing.
that stuff, right? And their finishing is getting better and better. The Chinese really stepped up their game on finishing. The finishes used to be just terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, everything about it. And so you would say, like, well, I'll tell you what's good about it. Parents buy by price.
Yeah.
And so now
sure.
you're a kid and you're going in to buy a guitar, and the kid wants a certain color and the parent wants a certain price.
Right.
And what happens is that the kid gets the guitar and he says, boy, it's just really hard to play.
Sure.
It's really difficult.
Yeah.
Can't keep it in tune, right? Really difficult to play. It's
Yeah.
all fret buzzing and all this stuff. Right? It's terrible. Fast forward to today, the guy gets the guitar. It's actually a pretty decent guitar.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's probably within the tolerances of a Gibson or a Fender back in the 70s or 80s.
And that's going to keep that kid playing.
And that's going to keep that kid playing.
Right. Yeah. Before he would have been like, oh, screw this. This isn't
Yeah.
fun.
Well, it's just too
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah. Right.
It's just too frustrating. I mean, don't make it too hard.
Right.
It's like I like a challenge, but not that much of a challenge, because if it's too frustrating, if I make no headway,
Yeah.
then
Then you're just wasting your time.
then you're just wasting your
Yeah.
time.
Right.
And it's not good for the industry. So I think the best thing for the industry is to embrace the computer-controlled, lathes, and embrace, modern techniques for creating guitars,
Right.
and embrace, competition from foreign sources, because it makes our guys step up their game.
Right.
Right? It really does. And so they have to, produce a better guitar and look at price points. Gibson just lowered prices.
Yeah.
Fender recently lowered prices
Sure,
a little
yeah.
bit because they have to remain competitive. It's good for us.
Yeah.
Right?
But now what does that do, though,
Right.
to the handmade stuff and the traditional thing? I mean,
There's
does
always
that-
a market for it because some people don't see the guitar as a tool. They see it as a friend, right? They see
yeah.
it, right? And they want something that they want bragging rights. They want something that I don't want some cookie cutter.
Right.
This is in any industry, right? You could do this with a bicycle. I want somebody to make me a bike, and it's going to cost me $3,000, maybe $4,000 for a handmade chromoly or aluminum bike, from a high-end maker with all the top parts. or I could go buy one off the shelf that's quite frankly made of chromoly or aluminum. It's the same materials. They're using the same parts on it, right? Except, I want the attention to detail that I think this person's bringing to it. And it's almost like you have a tech who's like constantly checking over the guitar, giving it more love and more attention. The makers of guitars today tend to use more exotic woods to differentiate themselves.
Right.
They're using flame tops, they're using flame binding, they're using flame, veneers on the headstock and stuff like that. Unfortunately for them, the barn makers are catching up with that. Again, you see what Harley Benton's doing. You see what the Squire and Epiphone and all these low-cost companies are doing. They're finding ways to...
all these Harley Bentons with the baked maple necks.
Right. Why does someone buy a Range Rover?
Right.
Sure. They're notoriously unreliable, right?
Yeah.
They really?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
They're more expensive than, a lot of vehicles, right? If you're just buying something to get you from point A to point B. But some people, damn it, I know it doesn't work great. I know I could buy something better and more reliable for half the money, but I want a Range Rover.
Right.
And it's that Range Rover crowd that will always go to a handmade artist because they want something special. They don't want something off the shelf. There'll always be a little market for that. The problem is the market is going to shrink a little bit, right? Because there's just so much product out there.
Yeah. And I guess now that the choice is maybe not easier to make, but the choice is the option. There are more options, right? And so for somebody, they don't have to choose. They don't have to be kind of a maybe on it. They can be like, well, no, I want an inexpensive guitar that plays great. I have all these choices now.
Right.
They don't have to be like, well, but maybe I should get something handmade because maybe that's the only way to get good quality. That kind of stuff. I mean, it's, for the people who know what they want.
Right.
It's a clear which direction they can
How
go.
do people sell $25,000 handmade wooden canoes?
Yeah.
When you got to go down to, Dick's Sporting Goods and walk out with a fiberglass canoe for $500.
Yeah.
How are you going to sell a $25,000 canoe?
Right.
And yet they do.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like a piece of artwork.
Yeah.
After a while, right? There's so much little attention to detail. Look at some of those PRSs.
Oh yeah.
Like the like the Graveyard series. It's like every like little high end accoutrement that they can fit on there is on there. And some people want it. They have a high demand for that kind of stuff. And there's an old saying: "We can't discriminate, so our prices will." Right? And so they want a more discriminate player. They want a high-end player. And so they tend to, price their stuff way up. That means there's very few of them out there. And that means if you have one, you're in the club, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. And I think you're right that crowd will always be there. But for everybody else, I feel like we're kind of in the golden age of guitars right now.
I think so. I think that as long as you go to the NAMM show and you're seeing more and more vendors, and you're not really seeing them close down like other industries, like we lost a couple of car manufacturers within the last 10 years, just because we just don't need that. We don't need Pontiac, and Saab, right? Those manufacturers sort of went away because there was just too many different brands on the market. We're not seeing that contraction like we saw in the automobile industry. It still seems to be growing and growing. New brands like Strandberg, who's one of the brands that's here. Dan Electro, who was an old school brand that probably had a lot of quality problems. Now someone buys the name and they hook up with a top Korean maker and they spec out all these guitars. And Dan Electro's had a huge revival, in their brand in the last 5 years because, they're cranking out product that's really good for short money. Most of their guitars are under $500.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that they couldn't have done 20 years ago.
No, a low-cost guitar in 1985 was $500.
Right.
But that was worth about $2,000 today, right?
Yeah.
So it's all relative. So not only have guitars gone down, but they're like relative cost to, goods, right? Because of consumer inflation, right? Has really brought it down.
Yeah.
I mean, $199 guitar. I'm picking up an acoustic. I had a big fat acoustic bass from Harley Benton the other day. Sounded so amazing. How much is this? $199.
Yeah.
It's like you could You know, imagine, and that's in today's money.
Yeah, sure.
You know, $1.99 was cheap in 1983.
Right.
You know, I paid $6.99 plus $100 for the case. It was like $840 for a Kramer in 1983. That's like over $2,000 today, close to $3,000 in real dollars.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, you know, not only have prices stayed the same, have gone down, but the value of money has diminished because, you know, salaries have gone up and just general inflation. So it's I mean, you adjust for inflation, guitars have never been cheaper than they are today.
Yeah. Well, Steve, thanks a ton for sitting down with me, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit more, and maybe in the video description below, I mean, I'll put some links to Steve's stuff, his channel and so forth, but maybe we can put a few links in there too for some of our favorite, you know, budget guitars that we're playing these days.
Absolutely.
Kind of yeah, cool. Thanks again, man.
Absolutely.
All right. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Now, I'm going to put a bunch of links in the video description below where you can check out Steve's channel here on YouTube. He does some really cool stuff, so definitely check that out. Now, as always, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the notification bell, and if you want to, feel free to check out my Patreon page. I'll put links for that in the video description below as well. And again, big shout out to the crew over at Thomann for filming that interview for me. They put on a really cool event. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video.